David, are you still with us? David, are you still with us?
We're just going to unmuting.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, hi, David. I was wondering, it was intriguing to see your expectation of a convergence of digital currencies going forward. And I was wondering if that is going to be primarily market-driven or driven by regulation.
I think it's going to be both, and I think the market-driven aspects of it is very similar to the one that happened more than 100 years ago, because the digital fiat currency approach that described by in our presentation does not require the existing infrastructure to change much, meaning that so their ledger system, their technology, their business logic and everything does not need to change. We have the technology to have a very light interface, which just change their monetary unit, allow them to communicate the monetary unit, but not every other things like user information, other things. So I think I heard Robert mentioning, it's going to take many years and all this. It takes us 3 months, usually, that's a longer one, to convert a mobile money system into digital fiat currency enclosure. So the approach we're taking is to take one at a time. And the business approach is to say the end user is not impacted. They're not saying that you have to change your application. You're still using the same mobile phone. The end user is not impacted. So this is the best way for us to merge, I think, the regulatory requirements and the leverage in the existing financial inclusion technology. If you notice, there was a diagram there. All the fintech technology provided the market creates to reach different people for convenience, for cost reduction, everything will be leveraged as a conduit for transporting this new digital fiat currency. And the technology, of course, I give you a little bit background of I've spent 20 years doing digital identity management for the US government. I designed that system and standardized it. And of course, that's why we're in ITU to create the focus group. We would like, the expert in BIS, everyone to look at it and welcome people here to join. But the point is, it's not central bank will say, boom, I use this technology. To be honest, the central bank can say the brick is a physical fiat currency. Everyone carry a brick, but nobody going to use it. So there has to be a market-driven technology combined with the power. The central bank need to know how to use their regulatory leverage. They do not choose technology. They set the requirements. And that's why this focus group we're creating is to determine the requirements that bridges the gap between whatever the technology that is developed and the ultimate goal of this digital currency.
Thank you, David. Gabriel, the advantages to the effort that you're making are clear, and the opportunities are clear. What, in terms of your experience so far and looking ahead, what is the biggest obstacle to the adoption of what you're proposing?
I would say that it's clear definition and guidance from the various central banks and regulators. It's defining not just what Bitcoin or cryptographic currencies would be how they would be treated in local contexts, but then furthering that, it's the lack of advanced legislation when it comes to discussing payment service provisions and digital assets, digital currencies, and virtual currencies.
So in terms of your engagements with the central bank so far, is this a conversation that they are willing to advance? Or are you getting a reluctance even to have the conversations?
No, the central banks in the region have been very forthcoming on wanting to take the next steps. but wanting to do it in a responsible environment, making sure that, as Bobby would have suggested, a sandbox is established, and the discussions have been leaning towards that, especially with our central bank in Barbados. And it's about establishing an environment where prototypes can be deployed, tested, evolved before a full production environment comes out. But the regional central banks, governors, have been very forthcoming towards wanting to see innovation implemented, and specifically the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and the Aruba Central Bank. They wish to see some advancements taking place.
You know, Bobby, as you itemize the list of challenges that exist before we sort of get full embrace of distributed ledger technologies and blockchains built upon that, and then the products that are going to rest upon that platform. Even with the impressive length of that list, it seems that at the pace at which things are moving, that your prognostication that this is going to take another 3 to 4 years before we can even begin to see it might seem a little long. You don't think there's a likelihood that we're going to see this snowballing more quickly?
Well, I would see it likely that it's going to be maybe a piece at a time. I think there's going to need to be time taken to understand, you know, what the market will respond to and what works, and there's also going to be some failures that need to be dealt with. It's a very large change, and I suspect it's not going to be easy as we all hope it will be. But I think we've already come a long way. I think the technology's come a long way. You know, knowing some of the things that Bitt has in the hopper, for example, I think it's going in the right direction. There's no way to say, you know, it'll take X number of years, but I think if we can chop off a bit at a time and progress, you know, I think we'll get there eventually.
So you mean bit by bit?
Can we start with this gentleman here in the tan jacket? No, this person had his hand up as well, so I'm starting here.
Okay, I'm going to give a clear example. One, given that in Bobby's presentation, you see a lot of banks in the US, I know of at least 2 of them who do correspondent banking in the region, would have private blockchains. They're working on that technology. I know one in Canada. Let's say in the Caribbean, we create our own blockchain among the islands. We have a private blockchain within the Caribbean. I'm asking very simply, can our private blockchain connect directly with the private blockchain in these established countries and cut down the costs for transactions across the Caribbean?
Okay, hold the answers. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Building on my colleague, the question, my initial question, but I mean the discussion afterwards kind of clarified, was that whether there was a regulatory sandbox in Barbados which allowed Bitt to do what it did, and apparently there was, and no, there was not. So, okay, that's another question. How could we be doing what we're doing without a regulatory sandbox? Okay, that's one thing. But Bitt, to clarify, is creating its own blockchain network. No, it's not. It's building it on the Bitcoin global network. Okay, that answers your question. So if Bitt is building this on the global Bitcoin network, then how, and Bitcoins are generated by Bit mining, and Bitcoins have a limit to how much mining can be done. How is it that I can onboard and buy a Bitt which varies drastically, the value of which varies drastically, without having, one, an exchange, And two, if I need an exchange, won't I have to use an established way of accessing that exchange, such as a credit card or access to US currency? So because of your intermittent responses, my question has changed to summarize. How is Bitt resolving the challenge of onboarding without the need of a credit card or access to US currency through which I buy Bitcoins at their market rates?
Okay, and last question to Maurice. I'm very sorry, I need to stick to the time, so this has to be the last question.
Michael.
If you do it in
Afternoon, everyone. Central banks in the region have typically been focused domestically. I mean, they use monetary policy to establish, the value of their domestic currency. And in pretty much most instances, let's forget about the Eastern Caribbean. The domestic currency is not easily tradable outside of that jurisdiction. How do you now get a central bank who is postured like that to embrace issuing this fiat currency that is now tradable in other markets? And I'm sure there are implications on the value of their currency, etc.
All right. Bobby, you go first.
I'll start by speaking to Agri's question. The question was, if there's a private blockchain network in the United States, and a private blockchain network in the Caribbean, can they work together? I think the answer to that is going to depend almost entirely on the market power of the private blockchain in the Caribbean. It's not going to be a technical issue. The technical issues can be gotten past, but it's going to be a question of whether other networks in the world recognize that this entity is powerful enough and has enough of a market presence that it's worth integrating with.
Thank you. David, is there anything you want to add?
So let's just understand.
Gabriel, 1 second. David?
Yeah, I even though the question was not asked about us specifically, I think a lot of the question that were being asked, in my opinion, is a wrong question, because you have started with a technology solution. If you look at what the requirements of the digital fiat currency needs to be, you can look no further from the paper currency today. And the technology that would mimicking as much as possible the behavior, that is what you would see most of those problems, like how do you link to this and that? Is it regular? Is it privately preserved? Do you have to make everyone upgrade the database and so on? Those problems does not even exist. If you limit your solution to this particular one, yes, you will see all of those lists. And I highly recommend Rob. If we could get together and we go through some of those your list, you'll see if you predispose to some technology before you even kind of go up and look at what are the problem we're solving, then you will run chasing the tails. I'm sorry I have to say that. That's my answer.
All right, thank you, David. Gabriel.
I agree to answer your question. If a bank in the United States is using a private blockchain, that's assuming that they have a set of standards that they're following. It's a private blockchain. If they're using an open standard blockchain, it's a very high and I mean, let's define blockchain really quickly. That is an open, distributed ledger technology driven by consensus algorithms. That is a blockchain. So there's no such thing per se as a private blockchain. It's like an oxymoron. The two don't go together. So anytime you hear a bank talking about private blockchain, they're really talking about their append-only ledgers that they've been using for the last 20 years. There's no innovation there, okay? They're just trying to ride the gravy train of blockchain. So interoperability, that's the standard of blockchain. It's a standard. That is that's the definition.
Is it a standard?
It's a definition of interoperability. That's the point. It's the regulatory sandbox doesn't exist, unfortunately, anywhere in the region, but there's multiple discussions about forming one. Now, you asked me one important question. What's the differentiation between the Barbados digital dollar and Bitcoin? Well, we aren't limited by the 21 million Bitcoin in existence or that will ever be in existence when it comes to digital asset issuance. So when I choose to issue a digital asset or a central bank monetary expansion team choose to issue a digital asset, what is actually occurring is they are placing a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. So in essence, what's happening is there's no limitation to how many transactions they can participate in, and therefore they can continue to issue X number or infinite number of digital fiat dollars if they wish to. So in essence, there is no supply cap or inability to continue to issue, nor is there a limitation fixed to the Bitcoin supply rate, nor is the price or any of the volatility that occurs, because this is a separate asset class. The only reason we're using Bitcoin is because we're using the security of that ledger, because it requires a lot of energy and makes it computationally impossible to destroy the data stored on that ledger.
All right.
It's a fiat currency. It's the Barbados dollar. So you're trading the Barbadian dollar. It's just digital now. There's no such laws that speak towards any digital assets on the island.
All right, so we need to close off this session. Let me thank David, Bobby, Gabe, an excellent session.